still here? Welcome to this Ohio 1st District Senate Forum. Tonight's event is sponsored by the American Association of University Women Findlay Chapter, the Courier, UFTV, and 1330 WFIN. I'm WFIN News Director Doug Jenkins. I'll serve as co-moderator for tonight's event, along with my co-moderator Steve Dillon of the Courier. Our participants for this evening's forum include Craig Kupferberg, Bob Barker Jr., and Rob McCauley. Now, as far as the ground rules for tonight's event go, each candidate will be given 3 minutes for an opening statement. After that, we'll have our question and answer session. Each candidate will get 60 seconds to answer each question that Steve or I ask. We do reserve the right to ask a follow-up question, and the candidates can give a 60-second response to that. We can ask the follow-up to either an individual or to the group as a whole. Now, if a candidate calls in to question another candidate during their response, we do give the other candidate a right to a 60-second rebuttal as well. Steve and I have selected the questions for tonight's forum, and the candidates are not aware of what they'll be asked. Before tonight's forum, we flipped a coin to decide who would go first. It was actually like a coin flipping tournament since there's 3 candidates. And Craig Kupferberg will give the first opening statement. Craig, we'll turn the floor over to you.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Craig Kupferberg. I am a lifelong public servant, 34 years as a public educator, over 20 years serving the community with addiction issues. I am a Ronald Reagan conservative. However, I hear Republican candidates typically declare that they're conservatives, particularly when it comes to pro-life, pro-Second Amendment, as well as espousing Judeo-Christian values. On these, I think all three candidates agree. So in what conservative values do we differ, is the question. Ronald Reagan said that centralized power is always the enemy to liberty. One Judeo-Christian value is that of free will. To me, in government, free will represents local control. And local control is the main reason that I decided to run to represent you in Columbus, as our Republican leadership in Columbus is taking away our local control in favor of centralized power. An example of this is the decision to collect municipal income tax at the state level, returning the dollars back to the city after the state keeps a handling fee. In essence, the state is confiscating part of the local dollars to fund their centralized agenda. Another example is for the past 20 years, our state legislatures have been taking over public education, spending millions of our taxpayer dollars on this process, and in the meantime only raising the average ACT score a mere 0.6 of a point in those 20 years. Most recent example is House Bill 512. It consolidates the Ohio Department of Education, the Board of Regents, and Workforce Development under one czar that would be appointed by the government. Our legislature is slowly taking over the entire public education system, turning it into something that would be more recognizable in West Virginia's, Kentucky's, Oklahoma's, and Arizona's public education systems. All four experienced teacher work stoppages this spring because of the horrible conditions of their school in a state-controlled system. Senator McCauley correctly opposes House Bill 512, but for the wrong reasons. He recently stated that at some time in the future we may end up with a Democratic governor, and that Democratic governor could use the bill to eventually hurt private schools. Well, I'm here to tell you it will devastate public schools. One thing I have learned is that you need to listen to what politicians say and what they don't say. Senator McCauley tells us that he's endorsed by Columbus Republican establishment. What he didn't tell you is that he's been a leader in Columbus Republicans as the assistant majority whip in the House. And the job of the assistant majority of the House is to get things passed for the leadership like these non-conservative centralized power bills in Ohio. Thank you.
Mr. Barker.
Yes, sir. Good evening, everybody. I am Bob Barker. I am running for Ohio's 1st District Senate seat because I'm one of the millions of Americans that are completely fed up with the government and the way it's being run today. The amount of corruption, the fact that there is no justice brought. I'm not aware of anybody that has actually been brought to trial for the crimes that they've committed. From the people I speak to, this is completely outrageous and it has to stop. We have to have accountability in our government. Myself, I'm a born-again Christian. My relationship with my Lord and Savior Jesus is very important to me. I model my life behind it. It's with that same level of commitment that I take my job seriously. I will not allow myself to get tied up in what's going on today. I'm a constitutionalist. I believe that our forefathers were wise enough in how they wrote our Constitution that it does need to be rewritten. What it needs to be done is read and followed. I'm also very adamant Second Amendment. Actually, today is a landmark day when the shot that was heard around the world was fired. Happened on Lexington Green. I find that fitting as far as the statement on the Second Amendment that every law that has ever been written against our Second Amendment has not stopped a single shooting. Actually, the only thing that's been proven to be effective against a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. That was proven a month after the shooting in Florida. I'm also very strong right to life. Being an ex-paramedic, my views of right to life is that it's not a question of life and when life starts. it's living tissue. From the time that conception occurs, it's a matter of DNA, actually. Your DNA is established within the first 24 hours of conception. If anybody's watched CSI movies, you know, that's how they determine who you are. You know, it's as individual to you as your fingerprints. I'm very strong about my beliefs. I'm very adamant about taking justice for the unborn, taking the rights of the people that can't fend for themselves to the government seat and being accountable. And that's it for me. Thank you very much.
Mr. McCauley.
Thank you. As mentioned before, I'm Senator Rob McCulley. I'm your current senator, and I've been fortunate enough to be the senator since December 5th when I was appointed to be in the Senate. I want to start off by saying a remark was made about House Bill 512. This is the second time I've had to refute that remark. I oppose 512 because it is a centralization of power, and that's the wrong policy. And actually, there's a Findlay Courier article that actually states that I oppose it for those reasons based off of a direct quote. But I want to talk about myself. In the months since I've been appointed to the Senate, it's been a pleasure to get over to this area of the state and this area of the district. It's been a pleasure to meet so many great people from Findlay, and it's been a pleasure to get their support, not just in my appointment, but in my re-election bid. Those people ranging from the Marathon Corporation all the way up to the Mayor Mahalik here of Findlay. I'm proud to have their support, and I'm proud to have them as constituents. I want to tell a little bit about myself and the reason I'm running. The reason I'm running is because of my desire to serve the public. It's been instilled in my family from generations upon generations and started, at least as far as I can tell, from my grandfather, who was a son of the Depression and who grew up with next to nothing, having to live with his own grandparents because his parents couldn't afford to keep him at that time. From that experience, he learned the value of being an American and being able to make a successful small business owner out of himself, and he learned that to whom much is given, much is expected. And in my case, I feel very fortunate to live in this country and having been blessed to want to give back to my community and to serve the Senate. I'm a loving husband of one, my wife Denise. If you're watching, Denise, I love you. Thanks for watching. And also my 3 children, my daughter Anna, who is 3, and my 10-month-old twin boys, Matt and Mike. I hope they're watching too and not making too much noise right now. But with all of that being said, I agree with Mr. Kupferberg that many of us espouse conservative beliefs. But the truth is, there's only one person who has the conservative voting record to back that up. If you are one that believes that the government doesn't create jobs and business is the one who creates jobs and that we need to lower the regulatory barriers around our private sector, then I encourage you to vote for me because I have a 100% NFIB voting record and the support of the NFIB in this race. If you're one who believes that life begins at conception and life is sacred and we must protect it, then I encourage you to vote for me. I have a 100% pro-life voting record and the endorsement of the Ohio Right to Life. And lastly, if you are one that believes in protecting our constitutional rights, including our Second Amendment right to bear arms, I have a 100% pro-gun voting record protecting the Second Amendment, and I encourage you to vote for me, the proven conservative in this race. Thank you.
All right, we'll now move into the question and answer format or portion of our forum tonight. I'll ask the first 2 questions. Steve will have the following 2 questions, and we'll alternate like that throughout the evening. You guys have already addressed this a little bit in your opening remarks, but we'll dive a little deeper on the subject in terms of government regulations. Of course, that comes up frequently on the campaign trail. What do you believe some of the more burdensome regulations at the state level are and that should be removed, and why? We'll start with you, Mr. Barker.
I believe taxes need to be readdressed. Once upon a time, they brought up the idea of a flat tax, and then it just got dropped. I think that we need to bring that back up and have a serious conversation about that. I think that fairness needs to be brought. I also think that our infrastructure really needs to be addressed, especially out near Van Wert County. You know, we've got a lot of roads that could really use a lot of work, and I think that some funds need to be brought into the area for that.
Thank you. Mr. McCollum?
Well, I'm actually glad you brought this up because actually today I introduced legislation that would eliminate 30% regulations across the board from all of our executive agencies. And actually, if they're not eliminated, then we'd borrow a line from President Trump, and we'd eliminate 2 for every one after that to make sure we hit those benchmarks. Ohio, actually, through executive rulemaking, has become one of the most regulated states in the country. It's hurting our businesses, it's hurting their productivity, and it is preventing the growth that we really deserve to have here in Ohio with our workforce and with the people who make this state great. I promise to take that seriously, and I promise to pass this bill. This is a bill that is very, very, very important to the Senate. It's a bill that I have the support of many of my colleagues, including the President of the Senate, President Obhoff, to pass the bill. And it's one that I think is a step in the right direction, although more work will need to be done to help unleash the economic potential of the state of Ohio.
Mr. Kupferberg.
I find it curious that we are one of the most regulated states in the nation, as was pointed out, because we have Republicans that have the majority of the House, the Senate, and the governor's mansion. How does that happen with Republicans in the majority? It's not a conservative principle. Again, we need to deregulate, and we need to deregulate not only our businesses, but our schools, and give local control back to the local officials. I wish that I could hear other Republicans talking about that as well, because I really believe local control is an issue that needs to be addressed.
All right. Normally, I would offer probably a rebuttal here, but actually my next question goes right into that subject. So I think we'll just move on to it. Mr. McCauley, you'll have the first crack at this. As was brought up, Republicans do have control of the State House, and there is a Republican governor. It's been that way for quite a while now. Why don't you believe some of these regulations have been repealed in that time?
That's a good question. I'm happy you brought it up. I'm equally as curious. It's inexcusable, and it's something that we need to take action on, and I have taken action on because I think it's absolutely of critical importance that we do it. The fact that we've had Republican control of the Senate since the 80s, and the fact that we've had Republican control of the House since 2010 and the governor's mansion, and that it's gotten to this point is not good. It's not good policy for Ohio. It's holding businesses back. But I can tell you there's a changing of times down there. I've been there since 2015, and this is something that I've tried to work on since I've been there. And now we are seeing a very noticeable wave of conservatism down there regarding repealing these, rolling back these regulations and bringing more power and more money down to the local level, including education, and to our local businesses. I'm proud to be part of it.
Mr. Kupferberg?
Well, as I mentioned before, Senator McCauley was part of the leadership in the House as a majority whip, and I find it very curious that he doesn't know how we got to the point that we are now. I, from day one, have been talking about deregulation, especially of governments, local governments, and of schools. And I'd be curious to hear how we voted on the income tax for the municipalities, because we're all going to suffer from that. All the municipalities in the state have limited resources and need those resources to work on the infrastructure. To have the state come in and take part of those resources from our local government, to me, is just ludicrous.
All right, we will allow for a 60-second rebuttal, and then we'll come to you, Mr. Barker, with your response to this, Mr. McCall.
Well, I can tell you this. As I pointed out earlier, these rules and regulations are not made by the legislature, and that's part of the problem. They're made by unelected bureaucrats in the executive branch. Primarily, we've probably gotten this way over the course of time, over the past several years, and it's one of the, well, probably past several decades, rather, and it's something that we take very seriously, and we're going to take care of it. I want to touch on the municipal income tax question that's been brought up by Mr. Kupferberg. The truth behind it is that what we ended up with wasn't a massive centralized collection of all municipal income taxes. Rather, it was an elective system on the part of the business who is filing a business net profits tax return. And so those are only businesses that are filing those returns, and it's only going to be businesses that file in multiple locations, because we have situations now where we have small businesses operating in multiple locations, having their cost of liability and or rather their cost of compliance exceeding their cost of liability, paying $100 for a tax return for no liability.
Okay.
That's wrong.
All right, Mr. Barker, your response on why things haven't changed under Republican leadership.
living out in Van Wert County, we have a plot of land. It's 160 acres. It's called a mega site. You know, Van Wert's put a lot of money into developing this site with a railroad spur, updating the water and sewage. We were down to one of two places that Honda was looking at to build a manufacturing site at. Indiana got it. Indiana got it because our laws would not allow us to give them enough of an incentive to build here in Ohio. That would have brought Van Wert 5,000 jobs, easy. I've never been up to the state level. I don't know what their discussions are. I know that they're killing us, and it needs to change, and we need to start sending different people up there to change these laws and get some jobs back into this state.
Okay, one area where we have heard a call for regulation is in regard to phosphorus on fields. Phosphorus runoff has been blamed for causing algae blooms in lake area as well as in small lakes like Grand Lake, St. Mary's. How do you propose balancing the needs of agriculture with protecting area waterways? Mr. Kaufenberg?
Well, first, I think we missed a great opportunity a decade ago when Grand Lake St. Mary's first had the issues of the algae. We've got the world-renowned research university, Ohio State University, and a living laboratory for this algae problem right there. And we could have done the research to help solve the problem. I'm glad that we put the impaired status on the western Lake Erie Basin. What I'm concerned is that our government's going to do what they've done for years, especially in education, and they're just going to come in and try to solve the problem and make it worse. What we need is a collaborative effort that includes Detroit, includes Toledo, includes agricultural business as well as other business at the table to come to a collaborative effort at this point and start the research that we should have started 10 years ago.
Mr. Barker?
Well, being from where I'm at, I'm surrounded by fields. If you go from my house and follow 224 back into town, it's about 5 miles. In the last 20 years, there's been a cancer death in every house. And that's a fact. I know that we're polluting our waterways and our lakes, and if we don't do something, it's going to kill all of us. I mean, cancer is such a rampant disease anymore. I mean, I would almost challenge anybody in the room to tell me that you don't know at least one person that's had cancer. Personally, my mother's sitting at home fighting it right now. There's got to be some alternatives available. If not, there has to be at least some way to come up with an alternative. I know that the glyphosates and everything else that they're dumping into our river systems, it's going to be the death of us if we don't change it.
Thank you. Mr. McCauley?
Thank you. Looking at this issue and looking at the fact that the 1st Senate District is probably the biggest agricultural district in the entire state, we need to be really careful about what we do here. The farmers, in many cases, have already taken an awful lot of the burden on their shoulders through the manure management plans and some of the legislation we passed then. The research is relatively new in a lot of this. And so my philosophy would be, let's look at it, let's let the research come out, let's let the research come through before we make any serious decisions about piling even more regulation on the agricultural industry, many of whom are good actors anyway. Particularly, I want to talk about visiting Dwayne Statler's home here in Hancock County. He said that during normal rain events, they are about half of what their phosphorus runoff is capped at. But during these record rainfall events that we seem to be having more and more, used to be a rarity, that's when they're going over. And we need to figure out what we can do if it will even make a difference.
Okay, thank you. Another industry facing stiff regulations is wind. What is the best policy for wind energy in Ohio? Mr. Barker?
That is a hotbed topic where I come from. Van Wert County's got about 40 of them up there, and I've heard from every person that demands no more be built. Honestly, I think the fair thing to do is to put it to a vote to the people. The people that have to listen to it, you know, they say that it's a nice quiet. No, it's like living next to the airport. I can throw a rock and hit 2 of them from where I live. They are somewhat noisy. It's an alternative energy source that if it did not have federal financing, it would not be sustainable. Honestly, I think that the program needs to be pulled and we need to find better assets for our money.
Okay.
I was actually joking with Bob before we went on the air today about this. This has become a hot button topic, and actually the legislation that is being proposed right now, currently there are 2 setbacks in Ohio. There's a fall setback to make sure a wind turbine doesn't fall on somebody's property, and there's a safety setback that's meant to compensate for ice throw and other things. And if you want to cross your neighbor's property, you need consent and you need to compensate that neighbor. There's actually legislation right now that would authorize the safety circle to cross somebody's property without consent or compensation. And so what I've done at the state level, representing the 1st District, which will be affected by this more than any other Senate district, is we've actually done what Bob just mentioned. We're crafting an amendment to require the opportunity, if the voters want it, to be able to go to the polls and decide once and for all if they want this in the affected area. Because this is not just, I will never argue that there is a huge economic benefit to the area when these things come in, but at its very core, this is a land use and land rights issue.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Kefferberg?
I tend to agree with what I've heard, because the 3 of us did talk about this before we started. And this is a huge issue, especially in Van Wert, Paulding County. These wind turbines, if it wasn't for the government's subsidies, they can't sustain themselves. So we've talked about setbacks. The previous senator even talked about bringing in the setbacks, which I think would have been a big mistake because of the landowner's rights and responsibilities. But I also think we need to start looking at a moratorium until these wind turbines can prove that they're self-sustaining. Because we don't want government subsidies to last forever. That has to stop at some point. So until that they can prove that they can sustain themselves and make a profit on their own, just like any other business, there's going to be a time that we have to bring an end to wind turbines.
Okay. Overdose deaths continue to rise in the state. Drug addiction, obviously, still a problem. And do you believe there are approaches to this issue that the state, Ohio, and much of the Midwest is facing that have been overlooked and need to be tried? And I believe Mr. Kupferberg has the first. Who was the last one, Steve?
No, Mr. McCauley.
Mr. McCauley has. Thank you.
Thank you. This is something that has affected all of our communities. I think each one of us up on this stage, and I'm sure every person here has known somebody who's been affected by this. My philosophy, you ask for any one solution. I think we need to be more cognizant of what's working on the local levels. The old saying is we have 50 laboratories of democracy in the United States. Well, I think we have 88 laboratories of different ways to deal with this in the state of Ohio. Let's figure out what's working across the state, because there's no single solution that is going to solve this. Every reasonable solution must be considered. The state has taken this seriously. We've actually made the largest investment in combating the opioid epidemic in the entire country through putting $180 million towards more treatment, towards more job training, towards more wraparound approaches to be able to deal with this and deal with this scourge that's affecting all of our communities.
Mr. Kupferberg?
I'm glad you bring this up, because as I said in my opening statement, I've been working with the community for over 20 years on addiction issues. And I have a 5-prong attack on this. One is to track amount of prescription drugs that are being given to any individual through pharmacists and doctors with technology. Work with community, school leaders, police, lawyers, anyone that works with youth and young adults to educate them about the signs, symptoms, and causes, as well as what happens to opioid addicts. Collaborate with leading medical professionals to talk about best practices that are happening around the state and the nation. We also need to find out why Ohio's been hit, one of the worst hit states in the state of Ohio. Why Ohio? So that we can prevent the next drug epidemic. And finally, funds also need to be provided so we can support those that are in the home of the addict. Because when you have an addict in the home, then the kids that are there have a much higher chance of becoming addicts. So we need to get to them early with resources to prevent that future addict.
Mr. Barker?
When I was in the Navy, they taught us when we were sinking, plug the biggest hole first. Sounds pretty common sense. Our biggest hole is our southern border. With all the drugs coming through, the 2 biggies that are killing everybody is heroin and fentanyl. Those are not manufactured locally. You don't get those down at the drugstore unless you've got a very specific prescription. The only way we're going to get this under control is to get that border under control first.
Okay. At this point, we're about halfway through, so we'll stop for a 2-minute break. When we come back, still several more questions and closing statements to come in our first Senate District Forum here at the University of Findlay. We'll be right back.
I choose Union Bank because they understand that I work hard for my money and deserve a reward, like Everyday Rewards Checking, a checking account that rewards you with a refund on your ATM charges. Plus, you can get paid cash rewards or great interest rate rewards just for using your debit card or paying a bill online, right from your phone or tablet. Stop by the Union Bank today and ask about Everyday Rewards Checking, or visit us online. Your community bank. Union Bank. Member FDIC. Why do I choose Union Bank? Because life is busy, and Union Bank understands that. So when I can't make it to the branch, I can still bank on my time. They offer a mobile app so I can pay bills on my cell phone. Mobile deposit so I can deposit a check with the click of a phone or tablet. And ATMs where I need them. Union Bank knows what I need. Go to theubank.com to find out how they can help you too. Your community bank. Union Bank. Member FDIC.
Rental Properties, a family-owned and operated residential rental company serving Findlay, Ohio and the surrounding areas. For over 50 years, Wasboro Rental Property has helped residents find the right apartment to fit their needs. Go to theshermanhouse.net for more rental information or call 419-423-8321. Wasboro is proud to support the Findlay Media Network.
Why do I choose Union Bank? Because they understand that I work hard for my money and deserve a reward, like Everyday Rewards Checking, a checking account that rewards you with a refund on your ATM charges. Plus, you can get paid cash rewards or great interest rate rewards just for using your debit card or paying a bill online, right from your phone or tablet. Stop by the Union Bank today and ask about Everyday Rewards Checking, or visit us online. Your community bank. Union Bank. Member FDIC.
We have 88 laboratories of democracy here in the state of Ohio. We need to use the same approach with education. Like Bob said, we need to look at for best practices. And one area we need to do that, I think, is in the area of workforce development. I was happy enough to be part of a project up in Northwest Ohio, or actually up in Henry County, when I was the Economic Development Director, where we got Northwest State together with Napoleon High School and with a local manufacturing company to give students the ability to earn college credit on site, getting real world experience. That's now expanded to 5 separate facilities. That's a best practice that I think we should be looking for to expand across the state.
Mr. Kupferberg.
As a conservative, I believe in competition. It brings up everybody. It inspires businesses, corporations, schools, anyone to improve. And I believe in school choice competition, but I think we need a level playing field. And our people in the state, they don't seem to believe in that. And one example I can give you is just recently this year, they changed the rules for students with disabilities. if they come to a point where they need to be exempted from state testing, you graduate them, but on your state report, you can't count them as a graduate. So our public schools are going to take a huge hit because of the change that they made in Columbus on students with disabilities. This is tantamount to the Special Olympics, saying, yeah, you can compete in the Special Olympics, but we can't call you an athlete. Sure, you can graduate, but the school can't call you a graduate, and we're going to stick it to the public schools because that's where the vast majorities of students with disabilities sit.
Okay, Mr. Kupferberg mentioned school choice, but this next question is a simple one. Where do you stand on school choice? And we'll start with you, Mr. McCauley.
Well, I'm a big believer in school choice. Particularly, I think parents have the ability to make the best decision for their kids. Whether that decision is to homeschool their children or whether that decision is to send their kids to a parochial school, of which we have very many across the 1st Senate District. Competition, like Mr. Kupferberg said, even in the education industry, sharpens each of our school districts. And the ability for a parent to say, what is best for my children, even if that's a Christian education, or even if that's just saying that they're going to be at home, I think is good things that we need to facilitate, that we need to allow in the state of Ohio, and we need to continue to foster in the state of Ohio to give parents the best choice to raise their family.
Okay, anything you wish to add, Mr. Kupferberg, on that topic?
Sure, because I kind of ran out of time a little bit. Our state legislature built a charter school program that was rated one of the lowest in the states of Ohio. We aren't building the competition the way it needs to be with a level playing field. Once we do that and give everybody the same playing field, then the competition and school choice will take off and education will improve. I believe parents are the most important person in a child's education. Any educator worth their salt would tell you that. And they need to be able to choose what they think is best for their child. Whether that be a Christian education, a public education, private, charter, online school, whatever it might be. But we need to get the information out there. What most people don't know, because of the way our legislature set up the charter schools, is the online charter schools would kick kids out of school to send them back to the public schools that don't have any choice. And then that, with 3 months would go by where that student wouldn't get any education. And then that student would drop out of the public school.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Barker?
I agree with the voucher system. I think that parents should have an open choice of where they send their children, whether it be private or local school, religious school, whatever it be, homeschool. I think that the choice needs to be returned to the parents. I know as a parent, I've got two 20-year-olds, and I just went through this with our own local schools, that it strikes me that parents need to be given back the power over their own children, and that's really been removed by and large by the school system.
Okay, thank you. Let's talk a little bit more about workforce and job development. What role do you believe the state legislature plays in job development? Is there anything more they can do to drive economic growth? We'll start with you, Mr. Kupferberg.
I think workforce development is extremely important. I think education never stops. And I'd be a fool as an educator to tell you anything different. I'm a perfect example. I retired from the education community. Retirement didn't sit well with me. My blood pressure was going up. I had to find something to do, and I went back and I got educated. I got my CDL license. And now I've got a new job, driving over-the-road trucks for Garner Trucking, a company that I'm very proud of. Hopefully, I'll be able next January to say that I'm now an Ohio Senator, but that's up to the voters. But I think we constantly need to be developing our skills, not only with our pre-kindergarten through college, but with adults as well, to keep up with the technology, to keep up with what industry is looking for. I work for Findlay City Schools, which oversees the Millstream Cooperative, and I think they've done an excellent job, especially with the industry around Findlay, in making sure that we're producing the types of employees that our employers are looking for.
Thank you. Mr. Barker?
In Van Wert, we have a school called Vantage Joint Vocational School. I actually went there the last 2 years of my high school and took up the welding class. Fantastic education. I'd recommend it to anybody that has no aspirations of going higher up to attorney or something like that. It gave me skills that I've used all my life, whether it be professionally or out in the backyard in the barn. So I'm all for it. I think that it's a a great education that should be available to anybody that would want to take it.
Thank you. Mr. McCauley, I'm sorry.
As I mentioned before, this is something I've been happy to work on since my time in economic development. And this is something that is a pending borderline crisis for us. And it's being compounded by the opioid epidemic, that we have workers retiring, part of the baby boomer generation, and the stock that's coming up to replace them, in many cases, don't have the skills, nor can they pass a drug test. And so this is a huge issue that we need to do. We need to work with the private sector to figure out what skills they need, and we also need to make it easier for the private sector to work with our education sector. Remove the barriers, allow them to forge those partnerships like the one I discussed earlier, where you can actually give students educational opportunities in a working factory or in a working hospital or any other place. I've been happy to support and craft legislation to that regard in my career. But as well, beyond that, we need to focus on the incumbent workforce, the people who are elder or a little bit older in age. Can't forget about them. We need to support their vocational training as well.
Thank you.
Members of the state legislature have been criticized for not cracking down on the culture of sexual harassment at the State House. What more can be done at the state level to address this issue? And Mr. Barker, we start with you.
Prosecute. You know, like I said before, until we start throwing people in jail for breaking laws, this isn't going to stop. You know, I mean, at the federal level, how many times has our Congress held hearings, you know, just to get to the root of the problem? And then it's like somebody with ADD, oh, squirrel. You know, we get off on something else. You know, prosecute them, put them in jail. That's the only way you're going to get this to stop.
Mr. McCullen.
Thank you. And this is an issue that obviously has hit close to home here in the 1st Senate District. I want to make it clear, I do not condone anything that's gone on down there. I think it's disgusting, particularly as the father of a daughter. I can't imagine her being treated the way that that some of the things that have gone on down there. And many of these people I know, which makes it even more disgusting to me. We need to have greater accountability. We need to have greater transparency. We've started with doing sexual harassment training, but that's not enough. There needs to be the zero tolerance policy. There needs to be an understanding amongst everybody that this will not be tolerated anymore.
Mr. Kupperberg.
I believe it's part of the culture down in Columbus. It needs to change. And one of the ways you change the culture is to change the people that are down there. I recall an article that was put out in the Courier in November, just before Thanksgiving. And I think the title of the article, and I'm really stretching my memory here, or at least the article talked about the GOP leadership knowing about a particular representative, the House of Representative member, before he was even elected, and what he was doing. And then after he was elected, he had an inappropriate relationship with someone in his House office and had to resign. Now, the fact that the House Republican leadership knew about it beforehand, and it appeared from the article even helped deceive the voters to get him elected, is a problem. And for me, it calls for a change in the type of Republicans that we're sending to Columbus. And I'd like to be part of that change.
Right. I'm going to audible on the script a little bit here, Steve. So you guys have all brought up issues of transparency in your answers in some way, shape, or form. What are some specific ways that the state legislature and the Senate can go about being more transparent about either the way they're doing business or the way they're conducting themselves in the State House? We'll start with you, Mr. McCauley.
Well, I think it all starts by changing the culture, like you mentioned. This is something that we need to be serious about, and we need to lead by actions. I know it's already been made very clear after the resignation, which led to the appointment in this district, that it will not be tolerated. They've been very public about that. And they've been very public about the fact that they're not going to continue to tolerate it beyond this. They need to be clear about what their training requirements are. They need to be clear about what their workforce policies are. This is the state's government, okay, which means it's the people's government. And the people deserve to know exactly how we're dealing with this and exactly what policies and procedures we're putting in place to make sure that this never happens again to anybody, male or female. And so in that regard, we need to continue to do that, and we need to be even more transparent than we're being right now.
Mr. Kupperberg.
I agree with the transparency and changing the culture. And I think you do that by not only holding the people that are responsible for these types of acts, but if our House Republican leadership did help cover up some of that and knew about it ahead of time, those people should be held accountable for it as well. And the best people to hold any politician or any elected official accountable are the voters. If the voters continue to send the same people to Columbus or Washington, D.C. or the city government that they're sending that put up with this kind of a culture, that is in leadership positions that put up with this kind of a culture, then shame on us all. Voters, legislatures, everybody. So I'm hoping the voters will take this seriously and send new people to Columbus.
Mr. Barker, on issues on being more transparent?
If I get this position, I'm going up and I'm going after recall. I want the ability to pull these people back out of their position, even if it's suspected, and hold hearings and find out, is this person actually doing this? And again, we need to go back to prosecuting. You know, I mean, you're giving your word. You're saying that you're going to be an upright person. You go there and suddenly we find out that you're doing all these things. And, you know, it seems that nothing happens. With recall, at least we can pull them back out of their position, put a temporary person in there and find out, is this person doing what they're doing, and fire them.
Okay, thank you. Medical marijuana is scheduled to become legal in Ohio this year. How do you feel about the rules that govern its use? Mr. Kupferberg?
Medical marijuana, I find it odd that we are treating marijuana different than any other drug that we buy, sell. I have come to realize that there are probably some medicinal uses for marijuana, but I believe it needs to go through the same testing that any other drug goes through. Let's find out what it is about marijuana that could be a medical positive, and then let's legalize that form. And if we can do it in a way that it doesn't affect people's mental status, doesn't give them that high that causes a mental addiction, because I don't believe marijuana is physically addiction, but it is mentally addictive, then fine, let's get it in a form that people can use it and benefit from it. But let's take it through the same testing process that we take any drug through to make sure it's safe and it works for what we want it to work for.
Okay, Mr. Barker.
Well, as a paramedic, this is a good subject. I honestly think there needs to be a lot more research done in it. I watched a video where there was a child that was actually seizing and was given an extract from marijuana, and you seen the seizure leave within seconds. There are compounds in there that do work. There are cancer eliminating compounds. There's seizure eliminating compounds. There's a multitude of uses that's in it, and we'll never know because they cannot charge you $50 for a pill for something that they can make for cents. They can't justify it, and they know we'd never pay for it. That's why we're paying for pills that's got an arm-long list of side effects to it. You know, at least that way they can say, hey, $1,000 a pill. That's what they're doing to us right now, and that's why they won't even touch marijuana. I think it needs to be researched more.
Thank you. Mr. McCauley?
If I could touch on a previous comment, I know Mr. Kupferberg has brought up on 2 separate occasions House leadership. I was a member of House leadership, but I can promise to all the voters right now I had no knowledge of any instances of sexual assault or abuse by any candidates at any given time. And if they did, I would have demanded that the Speaker remove them from the ballot and ask that they remove themselves from the ballot. Let me make that clear. As far as medical marijuana is concerned, this was a tough vote for me because this is something that I was unsure about. But at the same time, looking at some of the instances that have been talked about earlier, the fact that there have been people who've had over 100 seizures a day, it's gone down to less than 10, we do need to do more research. We owe it to many of the people who are out there suffering from the addiction to opioids to try this as an alternative, and I support the medical legalization of marijuana, and I ask the federal government to remove marijuana from FDA Schedule I, which will allow us to do more research.
Okay, thank you. What needs to be done to reduce gun violence? What can the state do to foster a safer state? Mr. Barker.
Well, I've been a very strong believer in regulations are doing nothing but taking guns away from law-abiding citizens. Again, they can't prove that a single law has stopped a single shooting. If you look at the last 20 big shootings, up in the age to 21 from 18 would not have stopped a one of them. The taking away AR-15s Well, I'll tell you, I'd rather face an AR-15 than an AK-47. It's a much more powerful rifle. I'm a strong believer that actually the best thing to do would be to repeal all the gun laws except the Second Amendment. Like I said, the only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun.
I personally believe that we need to enforce the laws that are already on the books. This is something that all of these laws that seek to take guns from people or seek to remove the Second Amendment rights from people or the gun buybacks, all they're going to do is take guns away from law-abiding citizens. The truth of the fact is that gun ownership has gone up drastically, and it's been well documented, particularly during Barack Obama's presidency, that it went up drastically. The homicide rate in this country has plummeted in the last 20 to 25 years. So the truth of the matter is that more guns doesn't necessarily correlate with more gun violence. And I share the belief that a good guy with a gun is the best way to stop a bad guy with a gun. I posit for this. Northwest Ohio has probably some of the highest gun ownership of any part in the state of Ohio. All right, we don't have a very high gun violence rate around here because we have law-abiding citizens who know and respect the use of guns.
Okay, Mr. Kemperman?
I'm going to concur with what they both said. I am a concealed carry permit holder. I do have my weapons, although I don't have it here because that would be illegal to bring it here, so I didn't bring it here with me. I do think that's a problem because I agree with both of them. A good guy with a gun stops a bad guy with a gun. And I've come to the point after what happened in Florida that we should be allowed, and we do allow educators, if the school board permits, for educators to carry concealed weapons. I don't know how many people understand that, but I've got 6 points, including the Board of Education would have to agree to it, the educator would have to volunteer to do it, and not be asked. An administrator would have to approve of it. There'd only be one in a hallway, so they're not shooting each other if something was to happen. The educator would have to submit to training that would be approved by the sheriff, and I went through more than concealed carry training. I took myself to faster as well. And the educator would have to holster that gun as soon as law enforcement showed up.
Okay, thank you.
We are getting towards the close of this, but I do want to follow up on that issue quickly with all three of you. But one of the things that we've heard in the wake of the Florida shooting is so-called red flag laws, where if somebody has something in their mental history or background, that they would be prevented from buying a weapon. And I wanted to see where you guys stand on that. We'll go down the line. We'll start with Mr. Barker.
That shooting was a catastrophe all the way around. Local police had 39 attempts to stop that. FBI had 2 attempts to stop it. The kids that knew the kid knew that that was going to happen. Until we start taking seriously the issues that are out there, it's not the gun that walks into the school and shoots somebody. It's a person with the deranged idea that it's okay to go kill. Until we start providing good quality medical help for these people and not taking their rights from them, but doing it the right way with the laws that are already on the books, the problem's going to continue.
Mr. McCollum?
Thank you. The thing that concerns me about these red flag laws, although they may sound good on the surface, is that we're basically authorizing family members, friends, many people with a close relationship with somebody, or law enforcement to seize somebody's lawfully obtained, lawfully owned firearm, and then subject that person to what may be an expensive court process to get it back. The devil is in the details with these provisions, and the truth of the matter is, when these individuals are law-abiding, they've done nothing illegal, they've not been proven guilty in court. We need to be real serious about any measures that we would take to roll back any of their Second Amendment rights, and that's where I stand on the issue.
Mr. Kupperberg?
I'll go back to the Second Amendment. People have a right to have a weapon, and there's only one way in this country that rights can be and should be taken away from any individual, and that's given due process procedures. They need to be able to face their accusers. They need to be able to question. But as long as they have their due process, I do believe then we should be able to take away their right to not only own a gun, but to have a gun or purchase a gun. But as a strong Second Amendment advocate, the only way I would agree to that is if a person had the due process that's afforded any U.S. citizen.
Okay, that will bring us now to our closing statements. Again, each candidate will have 3 minutes for their closing statements. In the beginning, we started with Mr. Kupperberg, who started, so we'll start with you, Mr. McCauley. You will have the first closing statement.
Thank you, I appreciate it, and thank you to Doug and Steve for being hosts and moderators tonight. I appreciate the opportunity, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk with the voters across the 1st Senate District. It's been an absolute pleasure to represent all of you in the Senate since December, and I've enjoyed it, and it's been an honor of my life. We've been to all 11 counties. We've met with voters all over Northwest Ohio, and we've gotten great support from all of those counties, including in my former House district, Williams, Henry, Putnam, part of Williams and part of Fulton County. Those are the people who knew me for the past 4 or 5 years, who've known the type of public servant I am, who've known the type of representative I was, and who knew the type of legislator that I was for them down in Columbus. Those people, I urge you to look at the support that I had from those districts. Look at the support from all of the Republican county-wide elected officials in that district. The support was unanimous. All of them have endorsed me. All of them endorsed me in the appointment process, and they continue to endorse me in the primary. They recognize the type of public servant I am. As mentioned before, I'm also thrilled to have the support of Mayor Lydia Mahalik here in Findlay and the Marathon Petroleum Corporation that has been a supporter of mine for years. And I think they realize the type of senator that I am, and they realize the record of results that I have. As I said before, if you're looking for somebody who has a proven record of results and track record at realizing that the government doesn't create jobs, businesses create jobs, then I urge you to support me, and we'll help roll back regulations on the business community and help our economy grow. If you're looking for somebody who has a proven track record on protecting the sanctity of life and realizing that life is a gift from God that begins at conception, then I urge you to vote for me and look at the 100% pro-life voting record that I have, and also look at the endorsement from the Ohio Right to Life that I have. And if you're looking for somebody who has protected our constitutional rights during his legislative career and who's protected our Second Amendment rights at every turn, then I urge the voters to look at me and look at my 100% voting record and the fact that I've been endorsed by Buckeye Firearms, the NRA, Ohio Right to Life, as I mentioned, the NFIB, the Ohio Chamber of Commerce. All of these are conservative organizations that realize the type of legislative record that I've put together. I will continue to put that legislative record together. I promise to represent the conservative values of Northwest Ohio, and I humbly ask for all of your support in the May 8th primary. Thank you.
Mr. Barker?
I've got 30-plus years as somebody who puts time into my community. Started out in the JCs in Van Wert. I was a JC for 2 years. That's a junior chamber of commerce. Got to learn how to manage projects, business. After that was the U.S. Navy. After that was fire department. I was on-call firefighter in Maine for 10 years. Did another 10 years in Ohio when I moved back here. I've got 16 years in EMS. It's in my heart to be a servant. I've spoken to thousands of people, and I was born blue collar. I've worked blue collar. I know people. I know the struggles. I know, what it's like to live paycheck to paycheck. I would really like the opportunity, if given so, to go to the State House and start working for the people for the change. Thank you.
Mr. Kupperberg?
I too, as I said in my opening statement, I've been a public servant all my life. Started when I was a student. That was the last time I ran for an elected office. I ran for student council president. That was my career as a politician. I'm a public servant. I was part of Key Club, sports. In college, I was a big brother for the Big Brother, Big Sister program. Out of college, I was a volunteer firefighter and an EMT on the life squad. I've served on countless number of different committees, local committees, to help improve our community here in Hancock County. I do think there's a problem in Columbus. We talked about it here. I do think we need a change in culture. Mr. McCauley talks about his voting record, and I commend the things that he talked about here. But he's the only one that can have a voting record because he's the only one that's been in the legislature. I'd love to have that chance to prove my conservative values and many of the things I talked about here today. I find it very ironic that he talks about the effort that he did, but he also mentioned that we're one of the most regulated states. How does that happen when he's part of the leadership of the Republican Party in Columbus? Again, I think we need a change in the culture and a change in the people that we're sending. I'll close with my opening statement, the part I didn't get to because I ran out of time, but we must follow our conservative principles and return control of local government and local public schools back to our locally elected officials, to those who are accountable to the local communities, and understand the unique needs, challenges, and desires of our local youth and our community. Senate District 1 is probably the most conservative district in the state of Ohio. And we have an opportunity to send the message loud and clear that we don't want centralized power in the state of Ohio. And that will mean something coming from this particular district. And we can do that by electing someone new, hopefully me, to be your representative in the Ohio Senate. Thank you.
Thank you. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight. I'd also like to thank the Courier for their coverage in print and online, UFTV for televising the forum, and WFIN at 1330 and 95.5 FM for live radio coverage. Special thank you tonight to the American Association of University Women Findlay Chapter, the University of Findlay's Center for Civic Engagement as well. Remember, early voting is now underway, and Election Day is May 8th. For Steve Dillon, I'm News Director Doug Jenkins, and good night from the University of Findlay.